So anyway, Leah, panelists. By the way, Michael Anderson had a work situation and had to leave. So Eric Yancey is going to take his place because he offered. Okay? And you behave yourself.
Never. Oh, if I may say something, if I could, please.
Yeah.
So, at the City of Irving, we did a proof of concept with the ARMIS solution. And they came back to me and said, you've got a drone on your network. And I'm like, yep, our SWAT team are certified flying drone pilots. And so just to tell you it's about everything, I'm like, are you kidding me with that? You think you have 1,000 assets, 20,000 things going on? I'm sorry, but we also were a water distribution and power and all that stuff. But yeah, amazing.
All right, thank you.
I didn't get paid for that, by the way.
Yeah. Make sure you grab a mold on your way out. If you want to grab two, there's pens.
Guys, come on.
I can do this solo.
No, Rusty, you don't want to? It's going to be better. I mean, it's going to be recorded. Look, each one of you have a different perspective. I realized that when Franklin couldn't make it, I ended up replacing with two. But, okay, I wasn't going to tell anybody no, because each of you had your own great ideas. Right? It's the first time I've had a panel discussion. I don't want to do it again.
Way to set us up.
No, I meant,
Embrace the thought.
I feel like I'm putting you on the spot, okay? But Leah is going to handle it.
Thanks everyone, and thanks Robin and the vendors. I think the last one said something about dirty data streams, right? And it just sounds dirty and messy and complex, right? And that's kind of the topic tonight that we're going to address is data protection. So before we really get into it, why don't each of you just do a quick who are you, who are you with, and then just tell us one thing that you like to do for fun. Eric, we'll start down there with you.
Okay. Who's who at the zoo? My name is Eric Yancey. I am the Information Security Officer for the wonderful city of Denton, Texas. And everything I say is not a reflection of theirs, but because I really do speak out. But I've been in information security back at the old 2600 PBX phases all the way through to where we're at now. And what I do is I have an MG, a 1977 and a 1971 MGB that gets me everywhere I want to go, but it costs me $250 in towing to get home. So that's my passion right there.
Rusty Kennington, I'm the CIO for Carlisle Weatherproofing Technologies. All the stuff you don't see once a building's complete, but it does all the waterproofing and all that. And what I do for fun is I flip houses.
I'm Salaja Kotra Turner, and I work for Brown Forman, which most people won't recognize. It seems to be a byline of mine. I always work for companies that you don't recognize it until I mention the brand name. So we make Jack Daniels and Woodford Reserve and Old Forester. So. All right. So what do I do for fun? Right now it seems to be traveling whether I like it or not. But other than that, because the company is based in Louisville, Kentucky, other than that, I read, listen to music, whatever I can do to relax.
Hi, I'm Sonia Hammond. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for National Veterinary Associates. We have over 1,500 locations of veterinary hospitals, emergency clinics, and pet resorts, over 40,000 employees. What I like to do for fun is I've been trying to make midnight yell as much as I can before Texas A&M football games.
Okay, my name is Harsh Kalra. I'm the CIO for the Vehicle and Equipment Finance business at BMO. Bank of Montreal, we're about top 10 North American bank with just approaching about $1 trillion in assets. I'm the CIO for one of the divisions inside it called the Vehicle and Equipment Finance. And what I like to do for fun, I like cycling. So I cycle quite a bit and use that as a way to raise money for charities.
So 2 CIOs and 2 CISOs. Interesting perspectives I know we're going to hear tonight, and all of you chime in. It's a conversation, and I think everyone has something to contribute. I will say, by the way, Leah with MasterCard, I can relate to Siluja. I used to work with companies that nobody heard their name, and now most people know our name. So I want to just set some context before we get into hear their different views on this topic that's still not solved for. So call to action for the vendors in the room. Think about how you can help us. But there's a couple things happening right now, you've probably seen in the news, that make this very relevant, and I think have started to change things in data protection and will for the future. But we have a prominent industry figure right now at his time at Uber who is now on trial this week, right? And that was a data breach, 57 million records, including driver's license numbers. Instagram was just fined over violating children data privacy. India just withdrew its data protection bill, and so very relevant to today. But I guess the first question for everyone is, what are the right ways when you think about building cultures at your company, and you have different purviews in your areas, and some of you are global and have other locations, to support data protection, because you're faced with the challenges that and the difficulties in analyzing and reporting on performance and across multiple regions and multiple cultures. So who wants to go first on this one?
You want to go first?
There we go, Siluja.
Oh, no.
Or Eric.
So I was blessed to be able to implement information security programs at 4 companies, which means a drastic change in culture. And so this actually resonates with me. To transition to embracing data protection, especially if somebody is, you go in, they know the skeletons, right? Your administrators, and the people who click on phishing and all those things, you need to make sure that they understand that they should report. They should be able to give you the data that you need to protect it. So I think that one of the biggest things is a risk-based solution is about what is their risk tolerance, what is the culture. So that is one of the biggest things you can do, is transition culture to embrace, not really celebrate, but embrace those data leaks and those vulnerabilities that your engineers know.
I'll follow up on Eric's comments and say that, when you're trying to change culture, you have to understand your user community and really bring it to them in a way that they can relate to. So in my environment, a lot of my people are veterinarians, vet techs. They're not technology people. They're not even, corporate America type people. It's a very different environment. So I have to bring it in a way that it means something to them, and I do that by speaking to the personal aspect, teaching them how to protect their own credit card, how to protect their social security number, how to protect their computer at home, how to protect their children online. Really starting with those basics at home before I even bring it into the work environment.
So I'll add on to that. I think as we look at culture, key thing that we think about is alignment, is to make sure that all parties are aligned. They understand not just the what, but the why. So actually our central group, our FCU group as we call it, they will do information sessions with various folks, and actually, like last one, they demoed how somebody could actually take control of your phone through sending a text from your child with a video, and then actually use that for ransomware. Nobody right now, thank you.
Someone's taking control
Siri
of
is
your
talking
phone
to me.
right now, yeah.
So I mean, the key thing is alignment, and then I think the other thing is around training and getting the awareness over there, and then explain the why you're trying to do it, and then be open to the ways that other people do it. Don't be overly prescriptive, then people just follow the rules and not necessarily fully understand the landscape.
I'm going to expand the culture a little bit because we are a global company, so we have offices in multiple countries. So for us, culture is beyond just the company culture, which pretty much I think mirrors what Sonia said. People who are not necessarily technical, and we have to start with awareness and personal awareness. But from a global perspective, the culture, it adds a different nuance to it, because different countries also have different cultures, they have different laws, and those laws are constantly changing. So trying to keep track of those and making sure that we're working with the people of that country to figure out how best to protect the data according to their local laws is where our biggest challenge lies for us.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is I agree with what Harsh said, what all the panelists said, but Harsh, in knowing the why. It's not compliance, that never works. It's understanding, and you reach them each differently. Everyone's why is different, but it should really all center around the company's success and doing what's right. And on, if you have consumer data, you know what's right, you know what's not, that kind of thing. So I think, but that culture has got to permeate from top to bottom. It's easy for the top guy to say it, and all this stuff happens in the trenches. So I think it's really getting to the why.
So I'm going to jump around a little bit, but you touched on the regulations and compliance, right? And I mean, there's a lot of them, and in different countries, different states, it's all different, and they're constantly changing. They're coming out with new ones. So how do you keep up with all the regulations and compliance, especially when it's different from region to region? Or is there a way? I don't know if we found that yet.
I haven't yet found a silver bullet, so if somebody does have one, I'm willing to hear it. So my quick answer is with great difficulty. So we actually have legal teams that are trying to stay on top of it. We have government relations people that are working with the various legal departments and trying to figure out what's going on. Sometimes it's entirely by accident. Sometimes it's an email a vendor might send, or something like, one of these, I can't come somewhere like, oh, I didn't even realize there was a new one there. Darn it, let me go back and check. So every now and then it's a bit of an accident, but for the most part, it comes from our legal departments and government relations. That's where we get it. Those people are not technical, so we work with them to interpret the law. And I have read more legal documents than I have ever thought I wanted to or would my entire life because of data privacy.
Anyone else want to address the question?
I would say that leaning on your legal team, of course, is very important. They're going to have a subscription to LexisNexis or something similar in whichever country they reside. And so that's definitely helpful in staying on top of the regulations and putting some of that workload on the legal team. But at the same time, some of the tools that are available today are actually doing a pretty good job at mapping to, like if you follow a particular regulation or framework, it'll map to that, and it will give notifications when a regulation changes or has an update that probably impacts you. So utilizing those tools has been very helpful for me because I have a large team, so I have to bring efficiency in other ways.
Yeah, I'd say, when it comes to regulations, regulators rarely drop something on you like at the last minute. There is usually a cycle about there's a wedding out cycle, and then there are carve-outs if you need them, and so on. So we have a pretty large team whose job is to stay ahead of the compliance and regulations, and we review them in monthly forums, etc. I think from a compliance to the existing regulations, we have a testing program. All this takes a lot of effort, to your point. It's not like, hey, we found the silver bullet, push this button and you got it. No, it takes a lot of effort. But the good thing is there is usually enough of a lead time to most regulations.
I can just add in that from a municipality standpoint, I'm fortunate that we don't have a lot of different regulatory across regions. However, I'm not fortunate enough to have my legal department do anything from a cybersecurity perspective. So what I've had to do is expand my threat intelligence. And so I have a daily routine. Every morning I get up and I know, don't hate me for this, it's like, Alexa, what's my daily feed? And it tells me all about the meetings I'm going to miss, and then all the cybersecurity news of the day. And then I register to the Texas House and basically all the legislation there. I will point out also that the city of Denton is an electrical producer. We have water, we have police, fire, 911, library, all those things. And so it does become a little bit of a challenge. Power Automate is my friend.
The one thing I'll add is for regulations where you're required to provide the data that you have on a consumer to that consumer, if you don't have some city portal or something like that where you got a big job ahead of you to figure out, is this person who they claim to be? You know, that's one of the things that a lot of people don't think about is how are we going to handle that kind of thing? Because obviously getting it wrong gets you deeper in the hole.
By the way, I'm waiting for my Alexa to make me coffee securely. But this is a question for everyone, the panel and everyone in the room. When we think about accountability and collaboration of all the different groups and people in your companies that are actually responsible for data and data protection and the compliance and regulation and law and privacy around it, right? It's multiple groups, multiple people, and we cannot keep making security the scapegoat anymore. So what are we doing to work more with those people, hold them accountable? That's kind of part of the culture. How is this getting done today? Whoever wants to start.
Yeah. So this is actually something that I've only been with the city of Denton for about a year, prior to that at Irving. And this was a huge challenge because my predecessor, they only knew cybersecurity as an annual training. Why are you even talking to me? So what I have to do is I go to the directors. Now you gotta recognize, I'm talking to a chief of police and the director in charge of the electrical grid and saying, I only have one resource. Who's gonna be first? 911, so it's a pretty challenging discussion. What I do is I go in and I say, we're not gonna talk about cybersecurity. I wanna know what is your 3 top metrics. And they're gonna tell you whatever their widgets are. You say, okay, how do you get to those metrics? What are the people, the processes, the technology that you need to get there? There's a summary at the end of this. So they're all on board, right? They're like, oh, because you're talking about them. You're not talking about, TCP IP package. You're saying, oh, okay, your finance, you have to do the following. Now, I just did a risk assessment. I know the inventory, the people, the processes, and I go, you know what would happen if that did not work? How long could you be in hot water before you had to walk away? Not, of course, not one, right? But now you say, how about if I reduce the risk using quantifiable Monte Carlo simulations? Good thing. Now, the controls, they're not mine. I go on vacation, they're not going to stop backups because they recognize that it tied back to what they do. And I love the CIOs here because if the technology isn't aligned with the people, I'm second generation going to fail because I'm securing crap that's not worth it. So that's what I have to do. Align security, don't take ownership, allow them to understand the culture and why they're the why. Go.
So, Eric, okay. So there's so dysfunctional separation between that ideology, right? There's too many silos, right? There's too much disparate thinking, right? Okay. How do we fix that?
You don't. You can't change the thing.
You cannot fix it.
But we have to. We have to do something better, improve somewhere.
Again, each one of those individual departments, right, have their ownership. They're the most important person in their little world.
The synergy come together. There has to be a way of saying, okay, so if we can't do it all, let's see if we can come together on some of these aspects in order to begin making those changes. You don't agree?
No, okay, so let me understand that you're not going to change their view of their department, but what you can do is establish one, you have these overlining like citywide policies, right? Thou shalt protect data, and then you go individually to how their unique situation, their unique requirements are being met by cyber. So now you have what's called a liaison, right? So you have your little deputy doo-doos over here and here and here who are cybersecurity, but they're not. And then you have a cybersecurity council that you get all the liars into a room, you throw up a bunch of pretty graphs and say, look, this is how we're all getting along together. But you're not going to go to the police and go, you know what, police chief, water is really, really important. Or if the electricity was out, how is your woo-woo going to go down the road? They're just not going to say, well, yeah, I acquiesce to them. You're not going to change that. But you have to get the glue together to get them all together in a unified portal.
Okay, so
Robin,
stand up.
make them accountable for once they're accountable for the risk or for what may happen, if they do not start talking the same language or at least start thinking about the same stuff, as soon as they know it's their decision, so if we can't help you, and tomorrow you may not be able to access the systems for next 10 hours, then you're the one who's reporting on the revenue, they'll listen.
Yeah, hold on.
Let me just, yeah, so we have the same thing in corporate world. I mean, every department has their own priorities, their own issues, the things that they want to get going, but they're all part of the same overall why, you know, and I think maybe protecting citizens or something like that might be, and you got to reach them there. But they don't have to give up their priorities, in my mind, in order to be, for this broad thing to be successful.
It's a little bit foreign to me that you're in this guy. Cybersecurity's job what? I mean, it's just period. I don't understand why, at least, okay, maybe in a city is different, and in a bank, I mean, if you cannot secure your assets, if you cannot secure access, those might as well not be there. Now again, it's a risk-based approach. I get that, right? You have to understand the risk, and you figure out, you know, what you're, you know, how you're going to tackle it, what risk you're going to take, what you're not, what your controls are. You know, if that risk comes to play, how you're going to make sure you catch it in time. All that goes into play. But I mean, I have yet to meet a department head that'll say, you know, I don't care about cybersecurity. I want my application to be up even if it is not secure. No, that just won't happen. Go ahead.
Okay, so I was actually going to ask a question. So this is really around the data security side. So here I am, right? If we're talking, so prior to being at Armis, and I was at FireEye Mandiant for 6.5 years. Prior to that, I ran the data security practice for WebSense, which is now ForcePoint. So I was the guy that would go in and meet with the non-technical stakeholders, right, and really focus on methodologies and execution strategies. Even when I was at WebSense internally, they said, hey, we now own data security. We need to do a better job of this. So brought me internally to our own company. And really, it's about going to those different data owners, those different business units, and asking very simple questions. What information do you have that if it was lost, stolen, compromised, unavailable, would impact your ability to function? And most people say, well, data security, we want to secure everything. Well, we don't want to start with that. We want to put it into 3 buckets. Yeah. It's going to be financial data, intellectual property, or personal identifiable information. And then we need to use things like qualitative analysis. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being who cares, 5 being this is going to be a really bad thing. Could this happen? How much of that data could you afford to lose before you felt pain? And then you start to look at things like data breach trends. You figure out where you're most likely to experience a high impact data breach. It's going to be, you know, some cyber attack that extorts it. It's going to be web uploads. It's going to be removable media. It's very unlikely that you're going to experience a major data breach over email because most people aren't trying to export tons of sensitive data over email, right? It's usually, what do you call it, like accidental. And in those cases, it's not necessarily that you have to report that, right, if you can go back and validate it. So again, when I looked at how do we work with other customers, and I don't even do this today, right, but it's still the fundamental thing of engaging with the data owners. It's not security's job, right? Like they're not the one, well, what I mean by that is security is not the one who's liable if you experience a breach. It's going to be that data owner that feels it. And
Okay.
well, it's true.
I know. Well, or they're facing jail time or getting fired, so, or is it their job? But gentlemen behind you, then we're going to go back to the panel and then this guy here.
I know Rick.
Yeah. No, Andrew and I are good.
I started handing him over. I'm like,
Yeah.
Here we go.
Rick Velasquez, I'm with Texas Capital Bank. I don't think there's one solution, obviously, that fits all. One of the things that I've had a lot of success with in the past, a lot of us have done risk assessments in the past, that's not uncommon. Usually like a facilitated risk assessment with the project team, usually hopefully getting it into the project methodology so they start by asking information security for a risk assessment, and then you have some good dialogue and you're bringing together a lot of the risks and everything, and then do a management summary. In the past, when we originally were doing a lot of those, this is at a former company up in Minnesota, an insurance company. A lot of that was just rubber stamped, and I think a lot of people have had that with risk assessments. They end up being rubber stamped. You go through a process, nothing ever really happens with them, although you really like something to. Where we really started gaining traction on it and changing things was leadership started opening up the door with the executives of the line of business. So I would take that management summary, I would go to them.
What is leadership? You mean leadership, open, what is leadership?
So it's a good question, Robin. So in our situation, it was a CIO worked with the other executives to get the approval for us to start opening up the door and having those conversations. So then I would go with the project lead with the executive of that line of business, and with the management summary in front of them, and their name was, well, first we had like a signature block, and after 4 of them, corporate legal caught wind of that, kind of put an axe to that right away. So we were able to still keep their names on there for attendees, but that started really gaining traction because then the project team started realizing, after they started being challenged, not by me, but by the executive, why they can't mitigate this and why do we have this high risk here and stuff. They started truly shifting left and correcting more and more of it up front because they knew they were going to have to answer those questions. And it was a great dialogue with the senior executive for those areas, much like going to the chief of police or whatever. So, but I think it's opening that door. That's the component that actually started making risk assessments really of value. And that's not like a one size fits all, but that was a key component of it.
So takeaway, continuous assessments, not just the once a year checkbox, and I think whenever you can have actionable, action-oriented remediation and follow-up and plans to help. I want to come back
I think
though,
getting them in front of the executive though,
Yes.
that's the key part.
and to our esteemed ladies here, I think I have some comments on this topic too, and I know we have other questions.
So for us, I think one of the cultural difficulties that we faced was a lot of non-technical people that definitely did not understand their role in data protection. So that's where we had to start. So what that meant was, in the best interest, like, they want to be super helpful to someone that calls, for example, about their pension data. Oh, I'll download it for you. Like, stop, don't do that. So we actually had to talk to people and say, you don't need to be quite that helpful. So it's a change in perspective and helping them understand how would you like somebody else to have your personal data. So grassroots awareness was what it took. It's not a lack of wanting to do the right thing. It's about redefining what the right thing was and helping them understand the risk of their actions. My favorite example for that was basically 25, 30 years ago, most of us walked into buildings, didn't have a badge, wave to the receptionist and walk in, done. Now when you think about it, do you ever walk into a building without badging in? That's a change in mindset that occurred over years after a lot of incidents, after a lot of awareness and education. This is no different. It's about teaching people to think about things differently because the world is different now than it was. Which leads to the second part, which is the accountability. By working through it to the point where we say, okay, this is what you need to do to protect data, it puts part of that accountability on them for their processes, for their actions. We can make our system of record as secure as possible, but if the person that has access to that system of record downloads the data in an Excel spreadsheet and stores it on their local laptop, it kind of defeats the purpose.
I would say never underestimate the creativity of your users.
Exactly. And they will find a way to get around any kind of restrictions we can put in. So we have to teach them that those restrictions were there for a reason and give them a reason to be protective of the data.
I would just mention that if you are trying to improve the culture and have people take accountability, we're all doing training, we're all doing phishing campaigns, putting up posters, everything we can think of. But at the end of the day, one of the things I found very interesting was that if someone clicked on an email and it happened to install malware on their machine, the IT department was shipping out a shiny new machine to them. So don't reward bad behavior. I'm just saying.
I don't know if, as far as what we call data loss prevention from email and so on, we have mechanisms in there so people cannot download stuff into emails and send it out. Does something get through? I'm told no, but that's of course there's probably some, but I mean, so it's a multi-pronged approach, like you said. Part is training, getting awareness of people. We do phishing campaigns, and when somebody clicks on that, we do not ship them a new machine. We actually, they have to go through mandatory training. And we also have utilities that if you suspect something might be a phishing email, you can actually forward that to a particular email address, and they will actually detect and say, yep, it's not safe, throw it away, or it is safe, keep it. So you give the tools to the people, you train them, and you put utilities around to make sure that you do not have a data loss. But as far as buy-in from the business leaders, I have not, I mean, especially lately with all the ransomware stuff that's going on, don't see any resistance from anyone, even saying, oh yeah, we got a data loss issue. You as the CIO have to evaluate it, and if the risk is high or not outside the tolerable range, then you do not allow that application to go forward.
Question or comment from our
Okay. Before I launch into my diatribe, I'm warning you, fair warning. I'll tell you my role. I'm on the other side. I am data analytics. My day-to-day job is bringing data workloads to the cloud and on-prem. So my problem is this.
Keep the microphone.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, a little louder.
A little louder. Is it better? Okay. My day-to-day job is bringing data workloads to the cloud. Also on-premise data warehouses, data analytics, to support all the analytics across the company. My question is, how much data protection is the correct level of data protection? I'll elaborate. We have 2 or 3 business cases where I work in a highly regulated industry, financial services. I understand the threat landscape, the regulatory landscape is constantly changing, evolving, I get that. But I'm dealing with privacy, security, compliance folks, this is a pet peeve by the way, who want to impose absolutely stringent requirements without understanding the use cases. I mean, I'm a music buff. I'll throw a couple of music analogies, right? You lock the door, you throw away the keys. Somebody will know what song I'm talking about. Here's the thing. How do I convince the privacy, the guys I work with every day, the CISO guys? Hey, take it use case basis. Help me establish a case, because a couple of you guys talked about accountability, about the tools. My business sponsors are willing to support that this is data which will only be accessible by the folks who need to. We have all the protective controls, but then if you put too many stringent controls, there will be shadow IT, guys. Let's face it. We've all been there. We've all seen that demo, right? Where is the question of balance? That's my second musical. I'll stop here.
No, that's a very good question, because there's a book, an audiobook I just finished. It's The Smartest Person in the Room. If you've not listened or heard that or read that book, you need to. Basically, knows the easy answer. And without knowing your people, I would say that when they don't understand the business, they're probably a little bit maybe not familiar with risk assessments and the mitigation techniques. Exactly. A 42-character passphrase may just be written down, not used, kind of thing. So I don't know your staff, but I will say that based on the information you just provided, I would say that they need to get a little bit more in tune with variable risk based on the quality and value of the data, but also understanding concatenating a bunch of data. Like, if I give you my password and only my password, it is no use. I give you my user ID and my password and the website, now I'm hosed, right? So we also have to understand that in data analytics and doing big data analysis, that you can take A, B, C and get to Z. And so that's not just an easy answer, which means they have to be competent, and they also have to understand the business and use cases. So how do you do that? We go back to culture. We go back to, hey, can you just come in and look at what I need to do? And my job as a CISO, ISO, is to protect the data, mitigate those risks that are designed to be mitigated, right? Not all. You can accept, transfer, those type of things. But if you mitigate a risk, it's based on lowering the risk to an acceptable level, not trying to eliminate it just because it's an easy answer. And I will tell you, the hardest thing in the world is to have a complex data system that is needed, open data requests, right? Everything at the city is one email request away from getting launched to the public. But being able to protect it, that's hard. That takes a layer over, no, you can't do it, or it's confidential, don't worry about it. And then it's like, that's great, we're out of business. So there you have it. You know, it's a locked box in the middle of the ocean and we're secure, but unusable. And so I'm kind of railing on the CISOs out there, and I don't mean to, but I've seen plenty of examples where, you know, again, no is an easy answer. The how can I support your business is complex.
Okay, so along those lines, and questions for all the others here, and I think this is going to get interesting with our CIOs and purview, and then the CISOs responsible. One, how do you figure out what data do you protect? Because if you can find all the data on Google, what's it matter anyways? I'm going somewhere with this. And then also, everything's moving, right? You've got on-prem, you've got the cloud, everything else, keeping track of it, how you securely do all of that. And if you are going through a cloud migration, bring in your security team at first, please. And do it cost effectively.
I'll start because I think that came from a comment that I threw out during our prep session. One of the things that I've always found interesting was, you know, we make a big deal about losing social security numbers when in reality, our social security numbers are already out there. They've all been stolen multiple times. So we're protecting something that's already been stolen. That's the reality of the situation today. So I don't think the regulatory bodies care, honestly. We're still expected to protect email address, which is public domain information, phone numbers, public domain information, names, physical address. Most of the information we're protecting that we have to report on are already public domain information. A quick Google search will give that to you. But from a regulatory perspective, it does not matter. So what it comes down to is risk. What is the regulatory body we're dealing with and how much of a risk is there? What is the data we're dealing with and what is the risk level? It comes back to a risk-based approach, working with the business and with the legal aspects of it, bringing those together and saying, sometimes, you know, I just go and say, I get it. It doesn't make sense. However, we still need to do it. And this is why. It's not about common sense, it's about reality.
You know, the thing that I've found is that you really want to talk in dollars and cents. I mean, when you're talking to the business, that's really all they care about. They don't care, is it secure or, you know, however you want to couch it. They're all about the bottom line. So you have to put it in a language that they get. I find that I usually identify different storage areas of information and I put a dollar figure on that. I say, if this area gets breached, what's it going to cost the company? And, you know, I mean, you can find the numbers out there. I think it's $152 a record currently for a data breach. You know, get the current number. There's even calculators online as well. But, you know, put together that formula and give them a dollar figure. And that's when you can say, okay, if this environment, this cloud environment, this on-prem environment, our O365 environment, whatever it is, if this gets breached, here's what it's going to cost. And then the executives will say, we can probably tolerate that. Or absolutely not, we can't. They're going to give you guidance.
But Sonia, okay, back to that, if this gets breached, are you giving an analysis of that perspective of the possibility of that being breached? And how does that work?
You always give them information on the likelihood of it happening. And you know your environment's better than anyone. You can evaluate how likely it is that a data breach is going to happen, or how likely it is that someone's going to click on, you know, a link that downloads ransomware.
Do they believe you?
Oh, absolutely, because
Show them figures?
never let a data incident go to waste.
Excellent.
If I may ask, there's the SEC proposed changes for cybersecurity that require a gain based on everything we've been discussing here?
Yeah, for me, and I've spent a lot of time, I'm not smart enough to be a CISO, but as a CIO, talking with the boards, and most of them have gotten pretty sharp when it comes to cybersecurity. It's not recent, but I understand the regulation you're talking about, what proposed. I think generally, though, I agree more with what Harsh had said earlier about it's not that, I don't see the fight anymore. I do see the need to educate, but I don't have a fight. I didn't know where you were going first, Eric. I thought you were kind of starting with the no, and this, but you didn't, and because I totally agree with you. Everyone's job in that company is to fulfill the mission of the company. I'm in the corporate side, so it's, yes, make money, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think what we have to do is make sure that we can manage the risk and do things intelligently, and most of these leaders are. Now, it wasn't always that way, you know, but I think these days it's not a tough conversation, and they do own it. I make sure they own it. You know, if there's breach, something like this,
But
it's,
Leslie, you're in a global company, really. You're in a faction of a global company. That mentality can be a little different. Can you give us a little
well,
bit?
you know, prior when I was with Henry, before we were acquired, we were North America, U.S. and Canada.
But you're Carlisle.
And Carlisle. And Carlisle is definitely, you know, Fortune 500. Things are much more methodical, and they've got a lot of competency around security and things like that. So we don't. But in either one of those environments, I didn't have to sell it. They got it, you know, and they did know the risk was keeping money, you know, and all that, you know, the risk of staying in business. So they all got that. You know, I think the opportunity is how do we paint the story, provide the statistics or whatever we need to do, and tell the story simply and quickly, because they all have a job to do, to where we can accept the risk that makes sense and move forward.
I just want to add on kind of a lane. We have to balance that with two, I think, very fundamental things. One is FUD, right? So you have to make sure that you're providing them the information, but not in a fear, uncertainty, and doubt, because you can fire that bullet once, but you have a musket, right? You don't have a Gatling gun. So after, you know, the world didn't end, they're going to come back and go, well, maybe that trust is limited. And the second is, I'll ask those people who did not have a car accident last month, what was the value of your car insurance? Not a dime, but guess what? You have a fender bender, State Farm is your new best friend. So when you also have to understand that, you know, we are in some sense we're that insurance in the back end. So how do you prove that value? Well, that's aligning your metric to really important things. How many things you blocked is irrelevant. So you were attacked. Oops, whoopsa. You have no ability to determine that. Now, the amount of time taken between an incident infiltration and you recognizing it and remediating it, that shows how competent you are. And by the way, I love capture the flags for my team. You will go through the incident response team. I put a text file on a server. You have a certain amount of time to do it. And if you don't, you're going to go through a lot more training. So that's something also to do. And one last thing, using the gun analogy again, Texas. There is no silver bullet. This is a house that's built with termites, right? You're gonna have a whole bunch of little things that have to accumulate, combine for a security culture and a security program. Because if you're looking for that one silver bullet or that vendor that's gonna solve it, like I'm gonna make you PCI compliant, you know, just step away so the lightning doesn't hit you too.
I heard someone up there and I said, you guys haven't raised up and brought that.
Craig, you gotta speak up.
I will speak up. So, you know, we're talking about data protection, and we're talking about the role that IT plays and cybersecurity plays in that. But there's a role that the business plays, and I haven't seen any one of you guys talk about the roles of data stewards, DPO officers, things like that that cover you from a regional to national to international to global, that actually is responsible for making sure that they lift some of that liability and load off of IT as a whole. And no one's addressed that yet. Why?
Is that really happening though?
I think, you know, okay, data security is really a team sport, like you said. Right? It takes multiple functions to be aligned around it. So there used to be a lot of resistance around it. That resistance is gone. Everybody gets it. We need to do it. Now it's a question of risk management. Understanding the risk, to your point, not using FUD, but actually using statistics to truly understand the problem so we can quantify it, get different points of view, the reputational risk, the financial risk, and you're right, the data stewards play a big part of it too. But it's like multiple layers of defense, right? Just like in a military operation, you have a first layer, second layer, third layer. We all play a part. And you have to also, that all has to come together. And as long as there's that culture within the organization, that data is basically, if you are not taking care of data, you're not taking care of your customer. If that's your mentality, things will work. Because if, in general, people want to take care of their customers, right? And data is, for a bank, if you're not protecting our data, we might as well not be in business,
Yeah, but the responsibility is not just with IT.
It's not just
No,
with
it's
IT.
not.
No, and that's why we have training. When we do training, it's not just for IT folks. It's basically the entire organization goes through data handling procedures. We do phishing campaigns, not for IT, but for non-IT users who may not be as savvy for around some of those things. So things like that. It's absolutely, it takes everybody. And then all these tools are there to protect you in case a control fails, but not necessarily saying you can do whatever the hell you want, and there is a control that will prevent DLP.
Yeah, don't disagree, but I think the aspect is that data ownership is never with IT.
Data ownership is, you're right, the data ownership is with the business, but IT enables a lot of the things that the business does. And that understanding, that partnership needs to be there. So we need to understand what they need, what the business needs to do, and business needs to understand what we. I do want to address your question though on the CISOs though. I think one of the things I found is we just moved our entire application suite to the cloud. And to your point, the first thing we did is we brought the CISO in and said, this is what we're trying to do. These are all the things we're thinking about. How do you think about this? And he gave us some ideas and said, do this differently, do that differently.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Is the gap shrinking
Gap in what?
as far as the understanding of what we need to really have from a data protection perspective? Because there is a huge gap between the understanding of what is really needed in order to protect the data. And if they don't understand it, you're a data company first. Data company, period. What is being done to shrink the gap from the gap?
Yeah, it depends on your environment. I'm sure, I've worked in financial, I know it's very different there. Now I'm in healthcare, and data is not the #1 priority. Saving a life is the #1 priority. So you have to, build it to your environment. And while data is very important, and I'm, putting out the programs to educate people on how to protect it and to think about, hey, if this was your information, would you want, somebody copying it to a USB drive? Trying to get them to understand and put theirself in the shoes of the data that they're about to, share or breach or whatever. It's still a very different environment though, because at the end of the day, I want that person worried about the animal's life they're trying to save. I don't want them thinking about, should I, share this information? Should I, stick this USB device in my computer? Their primary job is saving a life. So you really have to look at your environment and figure out how to speak in their language and know that still #1 at the end of the day is running the business, making the revenue, in our case, saving lives.
So, since we're mostly technologists here in CISOs, right? The question is this, and he goes to the.
I agree.
You don't?
No.
Okay, we're people, humans, breathing.
No, I'm
Rob,
saying that technology is a part of our makeup, but I'm telling you, people on this panel have more business acumen and understanding what's needed for the business than many people that are on the company.
No, I acknowledge that. Work with me though. So, quarterly user access reviews in a financial system. If you've done that, then you're going to look forward to probably some really invasive exams, because that is worse. You've got your accounting people who are going to use the, what is the separation of duties. You've got your technologists, you've got your database administrators. Who does user access reviews? And if you go to the CFO and say, you know what, is SA okay? They're going to look at you like crazy, right? But if you go to, so who owns that data, right? Who does quarterly user access reviews inside a complex system? That really kind of emphasizes for me what was stated about data ownership and complexity, and it is not an easy answer. And you do have to kind of divide that up, because you know what? I don't care if you have certain accounts payable access. If I rooted your system, I now have it, right? So you need to understand OS up to app layer. Yes, data ownership, but it doesn't just, it's a shared, it's a village.
It's a shared responsibility.
Along with the shared responsibility, I think, Eric, what you're trying to say is, what I'm hearing anyway, is the role we play is the bridge between the technology and the business. So our role is to explain, this is the risk, understand the business, understand the risk, and play that bridge.
Your narrative.
Yeah.
Narrative. Okay.
Yeah, one quick question. Yeah, so I know we have been talking about data protection from business to customer contracts, and obviously data is the best way for customer retention. But also what has happened, the transformation in the last many years, is businesses themselves have realized that data is their IP, right? It's not just the application and the customer contracts, correct? So it's almost like the analogy is, you lock your front door, bolts and everything, and open your backyard for community farming, right? So now the challenge is, so I'm from product engineering. I used to work for Thomson Reuters in regulatory software, exactly same as what you're saying, LexisNexis, we build products that will flag you, rules changed in this country, this part of the country, new data privacy laws come up here. So we used to build that software. Now I'm with NCR, about 600 banks use our software end to end, right? So there's also an amount of push we get from our customers, banks, that open up my data for me to get analytics, build insights, right? And the controlled release of data, right, as an aggregate form, right? Or sometimes it's aggregated with certain specialized attributes that you make more information, because everybody is realizing that data is important, but it has a short shelf life and it's commercialized, right? So, and this is where I see that CTOs, CIOs, and CISOs have to come to the table, because it's a constant challenge for us to draw that line as to what's the value of data that you're going to commercialize? What does it do to your business bottom line, right? How much are you going to stop? How much are you going to let go? So anything in those lines.
I can give you a perspective. I mean, I get it. So data, you cannot just release it to everybody, right? So what we are doing, as an example, is we're creating a marketplace of anonymized data sets. We understand, but the fact your name and address by itself is not valuable, but maybe like a tax area code or something like that, if it's feature engineered into something like that, and then the rest of the data is there, so it's anonymized to a certain extent, so it is still, it's not so obfuscated as it's unusable. It is anonymized, so it is usable, but you cannot trace back to who it was, right? Because in the end, what is the final goal? Our final goal is to protect the customer. The customer has a trust with us that we will use the data in the way that we said we were going to use, right? They've given us consent. They're regulatory, there's consent, but we also have what we call our own value system. So even though we could go scrape data from LinkedIn and all the social sites and find out all these things, we're probably not going to do that, because you think about it this way. If any strategy you're coming up with, and you're in a conference room, before COVID, we used to sit in conference rooms, and and one of the people sitting in the conference room is one of your customers, would they approve of what you're doing? And if the answer is yes, go forward. If the answer is no, then don't. Because just because they gave you consent on something doesn't give you the right to go, what I call the spirit, the word and the spirit, right? So just the word itself, but the spirit of what they give, that's pretty important too. So in your case, when you need to release data sets because they're important, having an anonymization scheme around that makes it easy for CISOs and CIOs to say, yeah, no problem, that's not going to create a breach situation, is probably the way to go. I don't know.
Actually, that's exactly what I was getting to, right? Partially it's policy driven, but a lot of it is also
Right.
Say it louder.
No, I mean, what I'm saying is the CISO role, there's a lot of policy-driven initiative that goes by the compliance side of it. But then it's also partnered with a lot of value-driven roles that come from the organization itself. The CIOs, the CTOs, I think that also factors a lot into data protection.
And CISOs and CTOs, they're all getting business savvy, right? So the question you always ask is, here's the outcome we need to achieve. Tell us from your perspective how you're going to achieve that outcome. If you start being prescriptive and say, I want you to approve this, that's when the CISO will say, no way, right? I'm not approving that, because you didn't explain the why. But if you explain the why and you say, okay, this is the outcome I'm trying to achieve, here is how I'm thinking about it, there's probably some other ways to think about it, how do you think about it? They will come up with an answer. And actually you make them part of the solution to actually look at, they're a risk owner along with you. And I think in the larger scheme of things, you take a more informed risk as opposed to a blind risk.
So I want to ask Rusty directly, because he's now with a global, I have to think about it, because there are several of you, but Rusty's now with a global company. So what happened? Did anything change from your philosophy or your strategy from being with Henry to being acquired into a global company, and how, what did you do to incorporate that strategy?
That came out of left field.
Put you on the spot.
I think there will be some things like GDPR, and then, one of the locations when we were acquired, they also moved about $1 billion worth of their business over to what was Henry, and so we're bigger now. We've got a lot of ERPs in different regions and things like that. There's a lot of challenges there, but I think we're still all about driving profitable growth, but through an exceptional customer experience. I mean, that's everyone is aligned in that, from operations, supply chain, all the sales groups and all that. So those things haven't changed. A bigger boat turns more slowly. You just got to get used to that. But I do think analytics, to your point, is one of the biggest things that we were doing at Henry, and we're actually ahead of where Carlisle was. And so they're adopting this this platform and helping us accelerate it. And we don't have consumer data, so there's some problems we really don't have like you guys do. But we are all about data. And about getting the right data in the right hands, so that we can differentiate that customer experience. You don't have to outrun the bear. You got to outrun the camper next to you. So we just need to have a better experience than our competitors. And so we're using data all over the place to do that. We measure on-time shipment, all the things you would think we would, and that's actually gotten more fuel since Carlisle acquired us, which is pretty exciting.
Can I? So, okay, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Going back to my pet peeve. Another dissonant note, sorry. Jazz music, anyone, dissonance. Are two things, data stewards. We've never been able to get good data stewards. I'll let you guys comment on that. So, can you hear me? We've never been able to hire good data stewards because somewhere between business IT, somewhere in between, people don't want the job. It's kind of a difficult job. That's one thing. I want your reactions. The second is what Robin said. The gap between business and IT. Business guys don't care. I speak to business guys every day. They really don't care.
So your data stewards are not somebody that you hire. You identify people within the business that seem to have an innate understanding of the value of the data and wanting to protect
They
it.
understand, they want the data, but they're not willing to be data stewards. I'll stop there. The second thing though is that the gap is because there's a disconnect. It's overreach, in my opinion. I'm passionate about data because that's what I want to bring to the table to enable the business, right? Problem is that we see it's an us versus them mentality. We see security, compliance, overreach, overkill.
You want? Okay, I'll tell you from my perspective.
He hasn't spoken yet today, so.
I think what you're talking about, I mean, again, maybe it's industry specific, and in financial services, there is a better realization of it, and it's not there as much. I mean, there used to be a time that there used to be a line between the application development teams and the security teams. Those lines have gotten blurred ever since you start having the it depends. If you're as an application, so we build applications as CIOs, right? So if you do not involve your security person until the day before going live, yeah, you got a problem, right? That's not the way you want to do things. You want to involve that person up front. And now, taking it into your data space, if you've got a mechanism to anonymize the data set, and you can show your CISO that that it is still a useful asset to the customer of that data, on somebody in the business side. At the same time, you've reduced the risk of a data loss scenario. That even if the data got in the bad hands, it won't be as as severe. I think CISOs will agree to that. CISOs will probably, and I think the CISO will.
Let me just intervene one thing. The steward comment. I wouldn't appoint a steward. And this may be different for where I am of manufacturing companies, but the people that produce the data as part of their job should own the accuracy of that data. So that's my 2 cents there.
Okay, so, wow, lots of things. For the most part, I do not believe the Information Security Office has the authority to say yes or no. I think we have the obligation to define the risk, show what we can do to mitigate the risk, and then it's a business decision. Now, if that risk threshold and culture of the company organization, probably. But if that risk exceeds your professional, what you feel ethically you can support, at some point you got to cut bait. You got to go. You got to say, hey, listen, I am not willing to be on that news front. I'm hearing some things that I'm inferring about a cultural problem because, as I said before, if your IT organization doesn't know why it exists, which is to enable the business and only to enable it, they don't buy green flashing lights because it's cool. They buy it because it's a force multiplier. It's because of automation. It's because of the customers. So if IT doesn't know what the heck the business is doing, and the CISO can't map controls directly to a risk mitigation that, by the way, is part of the business, then there's a cluster there that's not going to be resolved through just a silver bullet. You have to start with going top down, right? You got to get that culture started that says, listen, we're all here to do a job. I think CISOs are becoming more into the risk organization.
Yeah.
It started in the CFOs, went to CIOs. Now, just from a city's perspective, I deal with emergency management because a cyber attack against infrastructure is the same as a hurricane.
Yeah.
So, believe it or not, in order for me to get the National Guard, I have to go to my emergency manager because it is a risk, just like any other risk. And my job is to define it. By the way, that's huge because now I have to be an expert at everything, right? Enough to know what's going to go wrong and how to mitigate it. So that's why we partner, we have conversations like this, and then we go back to the business and say, listen, I can help you to this point. Residual risk says it's going to happen. Guess what? If it happens, it could happen again tomorrow. It's a flip of a coin, right? It's not statistical. And so that's the problem we have. Think Samsung, right? How many times are you going to breach that thing?
Can I? We have one more question, and then we're going to wrap it up.
I'm actually not going to give a question, but share one of the best practices. At least that has helped my career, throughout my career. I think one thing that's important to bridge that gap between business and IT is make yourself more approachable, especially the CISOs, right? We have that reputation of we're going to walk into the business and say, no, no, no. I am doing it, this is my way, it is security, and that's it. Make your processes so simple that somebody is thinking about bringing security at the end, says, oh, you know what, my job is to bring them at the front. Make that process easy. Make your people more affable. I know that's hard for IT people to be affable, but I think it's doable.
That's great guidance. So, by the way, I think this conversation and topic could keep going. So, Charles probably can get people to continue this on the podcast. David could probably get this at Digital Fight Club next year. I want to do one last question for everyone, and then we'll wrap. We didn't talk about it yet, the skill sets and staffing and training and new talent or new skill sets we need. I mean, we're in an era of automation, APIs, and extraction. So when you start to look at skill sets and what we need in these areas of data protection and these many others, just name like 2 off the top of your head that we need to start looking for in grooming and teaching. Eric, start down there.
Tenacity, curiosity. I can teach anybody who's willing to learn any technology out there, but you know what? Having that spidey sense that says all those green lights are nice, but you know the centrifuge is blowing up. So that's what I say. I do behavioral interviews, and I look for soft skills. Anything else is just, you know, I don't care what kind of animal you are.
Yeah, it's a good perspective. Following that line, I'd say I'd go for attitude first, and then aptitude. People like that, you can teach anything.
For me, it's risk-based mindset. You've got to be able to think about the risk. It kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier, is you need to understand the business. You need to step out and be able to talk to people and understand where they're coming from and not go overboard. Protect as much as is needed. We don't have to protect everything. It's not Fort Knox.
I also hire for attitude and personability. I think that's very important in security, much to your point. But I think the question was around technical skills that we need to be looking for. And I think we've all seen that, you know, APIs is the way we're connecting with external services these days. So that's definitely a skill set that you need to have in your security team. Additionally, I would say that you want someone who's a good threat hunter. That's been in the security realm for a long time, but finding a good one, that's a challenge. So, you know, if you see one, grab them.
Yeah, I'd say it's similar. We look for, attitude first, but aptitude is important. I mean, you got to have the skill sets, and we make, it's okay for somebody coming in, and we will then make the investment in training. I think looking at some numbers, we spent over $100 million last year just training our various employees. And so we will spend money on that, but what I look for is that what we call enterprise mindset. People that are going to look at things from an enterprise perspective, not just their function. Because that is how you connect the point that the person in the back was making, is making yourself available. That is if you have the enterprise mindset, you will do that. And so as far as skill sets, looking for that, we train. And we are hiring. I mean, we're opening up a tech hub here in the Dallas area, and we are hiring for all kinds of skill sets, security, development, and all those things. So certainly, if you know folks, let us know.
I'm going to say this. Sorry, I know Robin's focus. I promise. Doesn't matter. Great conversation, great dialogue. Bottom line, people will do what they measure and incentivize to do.
Absolutely. No, and you're absolutely right. No, if you don't mind, I'll add to that. That is upon the organization to incentivize that enterprise mindset. So if at the end of the year, if you're doing evaluations of your folks and you're basically putting somebody who got stuff done, but there's a lot of broken glass around them, then you're incentivizing the wrong stuff.
You got the wrong metric, right?
Right.
Metric defines your measurement of success. And if your metric is great, if you're not doing what you want to do, change your damn metric.
But
You're rewarding the wrong behavior.
But you're absolutely right, is you got to incentivize what you are looking for. And that's not as simple to say as I'm saying it. It doesn't happen tomorrow. It's a cultural shift. And it starts from the top and the bottom. So, but you're right, if you don't incent the right behaviors won't happen.
So key takeaways. This is not a problem that's solved, so vendors out there, help us out. Number 2, risk. It's all centered around risk, accountability, collaboration, constant upskilling, and keep it ethical.
And harsh as iron.
And harsh as iron, yes. But I do want to thank Eric and Rusty and Sailuja and Sonia and Harsh. Great discussion. I know this can keep going. And Robin, if you want to...
If you want to keep going, going. Downstairs is a restaurant called Xchange, and it's open till 10. So.
And then Charles will get you all on the podcast for many series of data protection. Robin, you want to close us out? Thank you.
Yeah, it's just that, you know, we have to wrap up and we end by 8:30, which we have 45 minutes for you to eat. Yeah, we got plenty of time. Eat, drink, and be merry. Talk to people, and engage, you know. And I just want to make sure we have last call at 8:30, and that we start packing up at that time. The reason why Charles mentioned that is because we've had Element Exchange happy hours that have gone on till midnight, and in certain circumstances. And I have also ended up with those who are a little bit more inebriated than I would appreciate, and the fact that it's a liability for us to take that on. Yeah, and if I could afford to pay for you guys to have Uber everywhere, but this is a goal-driven organization, not a money-driven organization. So I can't afford that. So you guys need to be responsible for yourselves. That's all I'm saying. But you know what? There's places downstairs you can always go and have more. You can have the bar. Yeah, go have the bar. Rusty says, hey, it's time.